We all know too well that Doctor Who thrives in the horror genre, but if I bring up the 7th series of the show, most people are going to frown, and understandably so. But for what it's worth, I think there are a handful of episodes that deserve a bit more credit here, and one of the genuine standouts to me is Hyde. From the get-go, the look and vibe of the house is very creepy. There's this 70s retro tech, it has a great creepy atmosphere. We play all of the haunted house best bits as we meet the 2 new characters in very quick succession, but that works. It doesn't necessarily feel rushed because it's through the Doctor's childlike excitement that is very present throughout this iteration of the character. That also allows the cliche tropes to feel less derivative because as we get further into the episode, obviously we get a few twists that kind of transform the story more into the sci-fi confines of Doctor Who. But even before that, and even after that, there's still a decent element of supernatural to the episode. And to me, this is one of those episodes where the new RTD era of him saying he wanted to take it in a more supernatural route and stuff, like, that's cool, but we've kind of always been doing that as well.
Boom! And you are?
Ghostbusters.
The Doctor and Clara are very aware of all the tropes that they're kind of seeing in front of them.
Witch of the well. So where's the well?
There is no well.
And that awareness to entertain this ghost hunting scenario is really fun, and it doesn't get much simpler than that. This big manor just screams haunted from every corner. The colour palette is quite warm, actually, of the house. Yellows and oranges. It feels very lived in, almost experienced, and that becomes quite relevant later on. The 2 characters introduced are Professor Palmer, his assistant and obvious love interest, Emma. And speaking of, I think she's a great individual for Clara to meet. As I discussed in my video on Deep Breath and how it's Clara's realisation of who the Doctor truly is underneath, I think how Emma is a character who fails to see how Palmer feels about her is representative of Clara too. Whether intentional or not, I'm not actually sure on the time frame of when these 2 episodes were written and thought out. I don't even know if Capaldi was cast at this point, so I might just be reading into that and making shit up, but I think it's pretty neat either way. She even directly says to Clara a few times about her doubts on the Doctor. In the same way Emma is blind to Palmer's true nature, Clara is somewhat blind to the Doctor's true nature. Palmer and the Doctor have a much more clear comparison drawn though. Palmer is a character we learn was involved in the war and was responsible for sending many men to their deaths, and upon returning, which is where we find him now, and he's haunted by all those decisions. This is an amazingly subtle way to set up the 50th anniversary because this is very similar to where we find the Doctor in Series 1 after the Time War. The Doctor has some secret motives for being here, but joins in with the ghost hunting to discover what's really going on, and immediately, as him and Clara make their way through the house, the light from the candles and the general spooky atmosphere is very effective and what really holds this episode up. They explore the grand home and find some weird paranormal activity in the music room, apparently the heart of the house, finding a cold spot and noticing some particularly strange activity, and suddenly things ramp up with a storm rolling over and a loud knocking echoing throughout the house. Swiftly things start to freeze over, we see a great effect on a window, and we start to see their breath, and it's really effective, goosebump inducing, and it crescendos in a moment where they're stood in fear in the shadow, and Clara tells the Doctor to let go of her hand, only for him to respond showing that he wasn't holding her hand, which is an excellently spooky moment where we see a brief silhouette of a creature behind them in a flash of lightning as they run back to the main room with the other 2. I love the Doctor and Clara's dynamic in this episode.
What is that?
It's a very loud noise, very angry noise.
Who's making it?
I don't know. Are you making it?
Generally, I'm not a fan of Eleven and Clara. Despite appreciating Eleven's arc, I always found Clara to be pretty one-dimensional during her first series, but there's no denying Smith and Coleman's chemistry, and I think within the spooky atmosphere of this episode, both of their comedic moments come through very effectively as a way of coping with a scary story. After getting downstairs, a very weird, strange black apparition appears, as well as the words, "Help me," written on the wall, changing the potential perspective of what's really going on. Maybe not a sinister ghost, but someone in peril. And following this, we get those 2 great conversations with all 4 characters separated, and it leads to the sequence of the Doctor taking different photos of the house throughout its many different time periods. This is a great use of the TARDIS and a great use of the show's baseline. Doctor Who can be so expansive in its storytelling, and unfortunately, as we've gone on, it's felt smaller and smaller. And it's always entertaining to see Smith and Coleman together, but as mentioned, my issue is her lack of depth as an individual throughout Series 7. Even though the arc is about the Doctor being wrong, it still doesn't serve Clara too well because she still is just there as the mystery box. But this is a pretty big exception and a pretty big highlight for the series, where we see her forced to reckon with the Doctor's true nature being unveiled, able to travel from the dawn of time and to the end of time without even breaking a sweat. There's some great lines of dialogue about everyone being a ghost to the Doctor, and it causes a bit of confrontation, and the Doctor comes off as perfectly alien here, not even understanding totally where Clara's emotion is coming from. They have a great moment discussing his view on human life, and he responds in a cryptically evasive and on-the-nose way. So we see that this isn't a ghost, but in fact a woman trapped in a pocket universe. The exposition is provided effectively and engagingly. Differentiating this from a parallel universe, it's a result of time travel from the future and crashing in this weird alternate world that is collapsing pretty quickly, and in which time moves differently to our reality. That's why in her photo she's always in the same position. Time moves much slower for her compared to the main universe. The visuals of the pocket dimension are really great. The edge of the cliff leading to total space is really cool, almost a liminal space kind of vibe to the whole thing. This floating rock with an impossible forest placed on top, feeling like it could belong in a Silent Hill segment. I also love the colour palette here. It's very strong in its blues and greens, and in total contrast to the house. It's much colder and almost inverted here. I just absolutely love the atmosphere. That might be the episode's greatest strength, the spooky atmosphere that persists throughout the entire runtime. Obviously here is where the Crooked Man resides. We've seen it briefly in flashes, as it too is trapped in this pocket universe, chasing the time traveller, who the Doctor does in fact find. Emma, with her psychic abilities and psychic connection to this woman that we don't yet know, is how they're able to travel to and from. And to help them find their way back, Emma is able to project the house so that he can get to exactly the same spot. So a brief chase ensues, and as expected, they get back to the room and she jumps through first, but just before the Doctor does, he hesitates when he hears that knocking, and it's just a brief acknowledgement of finally realising what was causing that. But that hesitation was a second too long, and Emma is unable to hold the portal open, leaving him trapped. This is an excellent moment as well. The silence and sudden realization of isolation in this Echo house, and then the jump cut as he takes his step to see him tread into woodland. It's just terrific and engages us very well, and suddenly becomes very tense. Clara obviously is adamant about getting the Doctor back, and with Emma in a pretty weakened state, she runs to the TARDIS for help, who also doesn't like her yet. But I guess she can convince it to quickly pop into the pocket dimension and grab the Doctor, which is a bit of a confusing moment. Earlier in the episode, we go out of our way to explain how the TARDIS can't go into the pocket dimension due to the dimension draining the TARDIS's power. But I guess due to Emma reopening the portal, it allows the TARDIS to quickly retrieve the Doctor. Honestly, it's not too clear, and this episode suffers from one of Series 7's biggest issues all round, in that the endings are incredibly rushed. This series tried to make every story into a blockbuster, even accompanied with movie posters each time, and it was a weird choice, but I guess it's a pretty cool idea. But I think maybe a 45-minute runtime doesn't really allow for that so much, so by the time they're ready to close up the bigger stories they're telling, there's no time to do so in a compelling way. But they saved the day, retrieving the crashed time traveller, so the haunting of Caliban House is over. I love during this epilogue we see the Doctor's true motivation for coming here. It was to see Emma and ask with her psychic abilities about Clara, progressing the arc of figuring out who she is after previously seeing two variations of her killed. But she just explains that Clara is an ordinary girl, and I love how she pulls him up on his obsession.
She's a perfectly ordinary girl.
And that's it, is it?
Why? Is that not enough?
Clara is just a normal girl, as we find out in the finale, but the Doctor is forcing her into one of his adventures. Ironically, this line from Belinda from the latest season perfectly resembles this side of the Doctor.
I am not one of your adventures.
You need to get me home.
And is one of my favourite scenes from the newest season, so it's a shame they never really made use of that after the robot revolution. But wait, there's more. It's still not over. The Doctor suddenly realizes that there's two creatures, only one of which being trapped in the pocket dimension, and they're actually lovers trying to reunite with each other. So once again, the Doctor travels over there to bring it back to live in its house with its soulmate, and I mean, that's fine, I guess. It just kind of felt entirely unnecessary to me. Maybe if they used the time to dwell on the unknowingness of this creature, it could have been more impactful. It's not necessarily awful, and it doesn't change the episode too much. It just feels random for me. Fun fact about this episode though, recently there were some older scripts for Doctor Who that were bought in an auction, and they revealed some very interesting things that would have changed episodes heavily in retrospect. This episode was one of them, and there was initially a stronger tie to the Time Lords and Gallifrey. I believe initially the Crooked Man was a Time Lord that had been trapped in this pocket universe, and it would relate back to Gallifrey. They would have caused the pocket dimension to be created and been trapped in there ever since, and they were waiting for the Doctor to visit so that they could use him to escape. I actually really like this, and it would have more explicitly got us prepared for the 50th, but in retrospect, with how lore heavy the show has gotten and constant it has become, I'm kind of glad they didn't go that route. But at the same time, at the time, I think that would have been very interesting, and I like that generally as a concept. I think the Time Lords serve as really effective villains most of the time, even in the lesser episodes. So, another Doctor Who episode that I always revisit every spooky season. It's not the greatest thing ever, and there are scarier episodes, but amongst a divisive series, I think this episode stands out. It is fueled by its immensely immersive and creepy atmosphere, and thankfully has characters that are actually interesting to keep us invested in the story and the plot. Despite the final moments, it's a well-crafted and paced haunted house tale with a great sci-fi spin that only enhances the story. So with all of that, I definitely recommend checking this episode out and reevaluating your thoughts on it, because I always find it a fun and creepy time. The sound design and the ghostly visuals persist throughout the runtime and is very effective. It's paced pretty well up until maybe the final little bit, but that's about all I have to say about the episode. So with all that said, next time this spooky season.
The court accepts the existence of God every time a witness swears to tell the truth. I think it's about time they accept the existence of the devil.